This hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. For many exiles, human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society activists around the world, it takes incredible courage to speak out against autocrats. Both friends and foes send their agents across borders to hunt down and harass critics, even here on U.S. soil. We've seen disturbing allegations against an Indian government official for involvement in planning to assassinate a U.S. citizen in New York who was critical of the Indian government. This follows allegations of India's involvement in the killing of a Canadian Sikh leader earlier this year. The Modi government had labeled both critics as terrorists. Transnational repression is not new, but modern technologies have expanded the government's reach like never before. One of the most sophisticated global campaigns of transnational repression comes from the People's Republic of China. Of course, they deny this. They have said, and I quote, "The accusations of transnational repression is totally made out of thin air." But tell that to the Olympic figure skater whose father participated in Tiananmen Square protests, or the Asian American Army veteran who ran for Congress in New York, or the Radio Free Asia journalist who lives in Virginia. Beijing targeted all of them and their family members, trying to get tax records, installing cameras in their home, stalking them, imprisoning their family back in China. But it's not just China. Chechen leader told those who opposed him, quote, "This modern age and technology allows us to know everything, and we can find any of you." His patron, President Putin, is just as brutal in his persecution of opponents. He sends his hit squads after those he calls scum and traitors. So I want to begin this hearing by thanking our witnesses, not just for coming to speak to us about this absolutely critical issue, but for your bravery and courage in the face of these attacks. And I'm going to have more to say about each one of our witnesses. This is a distinguished panel that have been on the forefront of the fight for human rights, and we thank you very much for your courage, and we particularly thank you for being with us today to share what we can do in regards to this important issue. Your continued dedication to defending human rights and democracy is an inspiration. As you all know, this is a deadly, serious threat to the safety of diaspora and exile communities. They use slander and libel laws to attack human rights defenders in court. They threaten the family members of dissidents who still live back home. And as you know, they have no problem physically assaulting or even killing to make their point. This oppression is not only felt by the direct victims of the agents of these regimes. By going after one or two critics, they send a message to the entire exile community. You're never safe anywhere, not even if you are in a democratic nation, not even if you have political asylum. That's what makes transnational repression so chilling. It forces many to stop speaking out or end their activism altogether. Whether it's China, Russia, Iran, or Tajikistan, these countries threaten human rights defenders all over the world. That is why I wrote to the president of Tajikistan expressing my concerns regarding his treatment of political opponents. And that's why I led the Transnational Repression Accountability and Prevention Act, to increase transparency about these regimes' abuse of Interpol red notices to get local law enforcement to arrest critics. But more is needed. In the coming days, I will be introducing the International Freedom Protection Act. This will address the growing use of transnational oppression by autocratic and illiberal states. I look forward to working with all the colleagues of this committee, Democrats and Republicans, on this legislation. And it's now my pleasure to turn it over to my distinguished colleague, Ranking Member Senator Risch.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that, and thank you for your leadership in this particular area. Most Americans are not familiar with the term transnational repression. It's not a household term or a household phrase, but Americans understand the concept. Transnational repression occurs when authoritarian governments go beyond their borders to harass and intimidate their citizens, those who defend human rights abroad, or anyone they consider to be a threat to their regimes. Governments who have gotten away with silencing dissidents inside their own country are now trying to stifle free speech around the world, including the United States. Just last week, the Department of Justice, as Chairman referred to, unsealed an indictment alleging an Indian government official engaged in a plot to assassinate a U.S. citizen in New York City. It should surprise no one that China is leading the world in using transnational repression to quash any sign of dissent. Last month, pro-CCP, Chinese Communist Party protesters, funded by the Chinese consulate, harassed and assaulted human rights advocates on U.S. soil at APEC in San Francisco. The failure of the administration and the city government to prevent or even respond to these attacks is deeply unfortunate. The administration prioritized a smooth meeting with Xi Jinping over addressing this issue publicly. Hong Kong authorities are increasingly engaged in acts of transnational repression. This fall, Hong Kong authorities issued bounties for political dissidents who left the city, some of whom are seeking asylum in the United States. Prominent Hong Kong businessman Jimmy Lee remains unjustly imprisoned while the CCP harasses his international legal team. I look forward to hearing directly from Ms. Gallagher on that matter today. Beyond Asia, it is clear the legacy of Soviet tyranny looms large in Eurasia. Russia sends its operatives to poison, intimidate, and sometimes assassinate members of the opposition and dissidents in exile. A few years ago, the Russians actually shot a man in the head in a public park in Germany in broad daylight. They also poisoned a man in a park in England in 2018, which a lot of us, of course, are very familiar with. There's no boundaries that they will respect, and that is clear. Our NATO ally, Turkey, is also a top offender. While it has decried acts of transnational repression that takes place on its soil, it has also used these same tactics to suppress Turkish dissidents outside of the country. This is evidenced by its pursuit of members of the Gulenist movement, including former NBA player Enes Kanter Freedom, who has had his Turkish passport canceled while abroad. Interpol red alerts issued for his arrest, and threats so aggressive the FBI has issued him a call button. The Iranian regime is another egregious yet unsurprising offender. It targets dissidents and critics abroad to include murder and kidnapping plots against Americans on U.S. soil. As countries fail to push back on these increasingly brazen actions that undermine sovereignty and national security, perpetrators grow more emboldened and additional countries adopt similar tactics. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on what more can be done to stop this egregious practice, and in particular, I want to hear what we, as the United States government, can do about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Risch. As I indicated, we have a really distinguished group of panelists today that have really seen firsthand the consequences of these actions. So today we're honored to welcome Mr. Christo Grusov, an award-winning investigative journalist and co-founder of the investigative outlet Bellingcat Productions. Through his investigative work, he has exposed numerous Russian plots and assassinations, including identifying the suspect responsible for the poisoning of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. This bravery earned him the European Press Prize for Investigative Reporting in 2019 and the Nanan Prize in 2021. In retaliation for his investigations into the activities of President Putin's Russia, he has experienced intimidation, surveillance, break-ins, and thefts, with Russia ordering his arrest in Ostensia earlier this year. Despite these threats, he has admirably persisted in his work. Welcome. We are also welcoming Michael Abramowitz, the president of Freedom House, an organization that's been critical in shedding a light on transnational repression and broader threats to democracy globally. Mr. Abramowitz has demonstrated his deep commitment to supporting freedom and democracy around the world through his illustrious career, which includes leading the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's the Vine Institute for Holocaust Education, and 24 years at the Washington Post, in which he covered many of my activities in the state legislature and in the Congress, and I don't hold any grudges. It's nice to have you here, Mr. Abramowitz. I'm also honored to welcome Ms. Keelune Gallagher, a human rights and civil liberties lawyer currently serving as the international legal counsel to the pro-democracy businessman and publisher Jimmy Lai. Through her career, Ms. Gallagher has represented many journalists, activists, and human rights defenders. For years, the People's Republic of China and Hong Kong authorities have targeted her for her work on Mr. Lai's case, including through death and rape threats, cyber attacks, and threats of prosecution and extradition to Hong Kong. Despite these attacks, Mr. Gallagher bravely continues to seek justice for Mr. Lai. So welcome to all. Mr. Russoff, will start off with you.